All right. I think Tommy is next. Tommy, let's see. I'm just trying to pull up the documents. Yeah, so now we'd like to introduce Tommy McElrath. He's the insect curator at the Illinois Natural History Survey. We're extremely lucky to have Tommy on board. He really is a as much of a developer and a force behind TaxonWorks as any of the sort of core team or as anybody in the community. And Tommy's going to talk a little bit about how to go from a collection object, this sort of abstract concept in TaxonWorks, to Gbif, and say a little bit about what happened this year in terms of some milestones in making that data available. So Tommy, I will pass it over to you if you can. Share your screen. All right.
All good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
See my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for that intro, Matt. We'll see how much of that I can cover. So yeah, I'm the collection manager of the insect collection here at the Illinois Natural History Survey. I do a lot of work with the species file group team, and I've been using TaxonWorks now since we migrated, and a bit before that, since about 2017. So I have a lot of experience with it now, and I am mostly just going to be talking about collection objects and collecting events, although I also do some cataloging and nomenclature work in TaxonWorks in another project. But let's go ahead and get started here. So first, I just want to thank the whole species file group team, all the folks there on the left, for all their amazing help in getting pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about actually developed. Matt mentioned that I've helped with developing a lot of things. That's mostly just me yelling at asking politely at the developers, hey, we really need this feature, and engaging with them in the ways they need to be engaged with. And they really deliver. They have delivered for me many, many, many times. For example, last night, there was something I wanted to demo, and there was a bug we found, and they really quick fixed it on the fly, so I could demo it this morning. So they're really awesome, and they've really helped develop some amazing tools that we use here in the insect collection. And I would also like to mention all the other people who've been using TaxonWorks, from my hourlies to other collaborators who have worked on projects with me, or we've had really good conversations about what should go into TaxonWorks, and they've led to so many of the changes and the features we've seen. I'll be talking about today as well. So it really is a community. I didn't do any of this on my own. So I just wanted to bring that up right at the beginning. So really briefly, the INHS Insect Collection is located here in Champaign, Illinois. We have about 3 to 4 million pinned insect specimens, an additional 4 to 5 million ones in ethanol, both in bulk and in individual lots. We have an additional 150,000 slides. We've been digitizing for a while, since the 1990s. So for example, we have, right now we have 2,566,957 individual specimens in the collection. That's not the number of collection objects, but that is the number of specimens. These are all just the digitized ones. So we still have a lot to go, but you can see some of that data here. Here's another quick view. You can see this is actually generated inside of TaxonWorks. You can see the breakdown of how they're prepared of all the different insect orders. This is a very big, confusing slide, but it's got a lot of awesome data. I just wanted to show you can do stuff like that. So in May of 2015, when you looked at our export of all of those digitized collection objects to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, there were 656,000 about. And just this year, in last June, we upgraded that to about 1,078,000 collection objects. So what happened in those 7 years? And I'm just going to give a little brief history of how we got from that number to the current number. And actually, there's more we haven't updated in a couple months, and we'll be doing that soon. But I just want to kind of go over a few of that and talk about how TaxonWorks was involved in getting us from that number to our current number as a solution to a lot of the issues we were facing. So in 2015, we were still using 3 different databases, non-TaxonWorks databases. We were using Microsoft Access one for profiling, 3i, and a custom SQL database created by Dmitry Dmitriev for some basic data entry, FileMaker Pro for some more rigorous data entry. And Dmitry had to basically write a custom script to collate all of this, export it as a Darwin Core archive, and get that up to Gbif. This did not include any images or image links. None of our databases could handle images. There were a lot of other legacy issues with these databases. It was a little bit confusing to use 3 different ones, and they had to work together. And we continued to use this until late 2019, while TaxonWorks was still being developed. Alongside that, we were doing a lot of digitization in these databases, along with in TaxonWorks eventually. There was a Tritrophic Interactions grant that digitized a whole bunch of hemipterans, capturing a lot of verbatim data. This generated thousands and thousands of new collection objects. We also, Ed DeWalt also got a Collections in Support of Biological Research grant for a bunch of orphan collections that we took on. A lot of Ephemeroptera, Trichoptera, Plecoptera, a lot of aquatic orders that led to about 100,000 more collection objects. This was alongside the beady spider collection at Southern Illinois University. And we were capturing images of labels as well as verbatim labeled data from those specimens, so generating more digitized objects there. And then to go back even farther, in the early 2000s, a different project had started to photograph all of our entire slide collection at a very gross level, doing images of slide trays and adding database labels. But unfortunately, our database couldn't handle images. And so we were entering those manually, but not associated with the images. There were some things happening there. So lots more images still needed to be added to the database. And finally, we most recently were lucky enough to be part of the Terrestrial Parasite Tracker grant. And so we've been imaging and databasing a lot of our terrestrial parasite specimens, things like mosquitoes and biting flies, fleas and lice, all the most pleasant insects you can think of. So many thousands of new specimens are being generated, and we needed a platform for that. So TaxonWorks was the logical choice. I mean, some of our curators are developers of it. And as a part of that, I agreed to help, as the collection manager, I agreed to help them develop our main digitization needs in TaxonWorks. And so from when I got here, and obviously before then, until recently and continuing on, I've been helping develop a lot of these tasks that you now see in TaxonWorks, things like editing loans and creating loans and loan items, comprehensively digitizing a single specimen or collection object, bulk editing a bunch of different collection objects, filtering collection objects, developing some custom workflows to add more specimens quickly into the collection, into the database. Filtering and editing, collecting events, and looking at things that way. And finally, most recently, exporting all of this data as a Darwin Core archive that can be ingested by Gbif, as well as importing Darwin Core archives into the database as well, which was another issue. This was especially an issue as over the past few years, we've had a lot of really awesome ecologists who have deposited a bunch of specimens with the insect collection, and they handed me off a Darwin Core archive associated with their projects and as well as the specimens. And all I had to do was put it in the collection and import the Darwin Core archive. But until recently, we didn't have an importer for that. So that step in development was huge. So we were waiting on that for a few years. So once we finally decided that we were ready to pull the plug or push the button, however you want to say it, Dmitry Dmitriev had to, for to start, we actually iterated for many years on actually creating a custom script to migrate from 3 different databases into TaxonWorks. And this was mostly the project of Dmitry Dmitriev. And just to give you an idea of how much stuff got migrated, this is just a few of the numbers. Almost 1 million collection objects, 250,000 collecting events that had to be custom created from old locality tables because we didn't used to have the idea of collecting events. Many containers, a lot of data quality assurance migration through the form of data attributes, loan items and loan forms, and lots of names and nomenclature. It was an amazing script, but if any of you are thinking about migrating, this is the kind of thing that it'll take, and it takes a long time. It takes a lot of iteration. We found lots of errors. We had to proof this many times, but we finally went ahead and did this in November of 2019 and started using TaxonWorks full time. So before I get into talking about those tasks, I wanted to just bring up some TaxonWorks terminology for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So I've already talked about this a little bit, but collection objects are can be a little bit confusing for people. Very briefly, this is loosely an object collected from nature and put into a museum. So it has to have a physical specimen. It's something you can give an identifier to in a museum. So it can be a lot, it can be a specimen. So it includes those 2 traditional terms in terms of things you assign identifiers to. So in the insect collection, we have things on pins. Those are collection objects, like this beautiful, weird, tiny brown beetle. Things in vials, these are collection objects as well. You'll notice there's multiples there, but that's 1 collection object, even though there are 3 specimens. So just to give you some idea of what that is. So how did those get managed in TaxonWorks? And I'd like to do some quick lightning demos here, just to look at, just so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. So let's look at an object in TaxonWorks. Debbie, can you confirm you're still seeing my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. You're still seeing TaxonWorks now?
Collection objects.
All right, great. So here's a nice, this is the browse view. And so when you're in TaxonWorks, this is a single task within TaxonWorks. This one's called Browse Collection Objects. There are a lot of browse and filter tasks in TaxonWorks, and these let you look at and filter your different data classes. So this one is a timeline view, and Brian Fisher very briefly showed this off yesterday, of a collection object. So this is INHS insect collection 1,006,333. It's a cerambycid that I collected in New Mexico. And you can see I've actually added images of the specimen here when it was collected. And then, of course, I have since pinned it up, and I haven't taken any pictures of that, but you notice I've got the images here. But you can see this nice timeline view of this specimen, everything from, okay, here's when it was collected last year. I determined it as this, or actually I didn't determine it, some other people did in 2021. It was georeferenced right here, and I gave it a catalog number, and then I added some depictions, and I updated it a couple months ago. So that's a nice timeline view of how the specimen came to be where it is. And if you come down here, you'll actually see that this is how it'll be exported eventually in a Darwin course. This is a completely different view, tells you a little bit more of how it will be exported as a flat table instead of in the nice complicated database format we have it right here. You can see we have associated media with links to getting that media through the API. So that's one example of a specimen. This is the browse view. And so if I really quick pop back, let's look at an even more in-depth view, and let's look at this in the editing window instead. So just to give you an idea, you can go between the browse, and this is edit. This is the edit task for TaxonWorks. You can go back and forth between these in the radial. So I can go to this and browse this one. If I just go here and click on browse, you can see that same timeline view of this specimen. But let's go to the edit view here. Go to this one. So this is a task I helped develop pretty early on. This is your extremely slow but very complex way to digitize a specimen or a collection object in TaxonWorks. You can add identifiers, repositories, preparations, verbatim label data. You can add images of both the specimen as well as the data associated with the specimen, classify it into different biocreations like life stages and sex, and these are custom categories that you can create and manage in TaxonWorks. You can add your determinations and determiners here, and then add collecting events, associate collecting events. You can also add biological associations, and you can create type material. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for everything about one specimen, getting it from 0 to hero, from not digitized to ready to export to Gbif. And just as a fun thing here, you'll notice I've got some images of the specimen. This is a really cool sagrine chrysomelid that was actually digitized and imaged during COVID lockdown at certain points. And what's really fun, so this is just a fun example of things you can do in TaxonWorks. I've actually added and you can add depictions and images to everything in TaxonWorks, including to the determination itself. You'll notice I've got 3 different people here helping identify the specimen. And I have a depiction of that, and it's kind of hard to see right now, but this is actually a screenshot of a Twitter interaction where these 3 people helped me figure out, oh, this is not a cerambycid. This is a really weird sagrine chrysomelid. And I did a little bit more research and figured out exactly what it was using some literature, but they helped me get there. You can add depictions to determinations. So that's a really quick view of that. So this is how we mainly do really slow specimen digitization. There are some tools to make it go faster, things like locking and cloning and saving in new, so you can kind of duplicate things quicker, duplicate subsets of the information in here more quickly. But that's how we manage collection objects in TaxonWorks. So that was one of our first big developments. The next one was collecting events. Some of the things we did was with collecting events. So, and again, just to define some terminology here, a collecting event is the who, when, where, and how of how a specimen got to be where it is, the sort of the locality or other information besides the determination label on a specimen. So for example, there's this beautiful Illinois prairie, restored prairie next to a river. That's a collecting event. There's me collecting from a log. That's a collecting event. There's this weird human and yucca plant hybrid. That's another collecting event. So this is where different specimens came from that are now in the collection. And you can add these images to collecting events in TaxonWorks. So let's show that. So here is 2 tasks: filter collecting events and browse collecting events. So let's look at one example filter here. So here what I've done is I've gone through and filtered any collecting event that was on the 6th of June. So I've gone here and I've selected this as a filter. And you can see there's only 4 that are available. These were when I was collecting on Mount Humphreys this last summer. And let's take a look at this collecting event in TaxonWorks using the browse feature. And you can see here's all the information associated with that collecting event. Here's the label that would go on a specimen. Here's the georeference for that collecting event. And here are all the depictions I've put on this collecting event. And it's where I collected these beautiful little brown monotomids under bark of populus. Here you can see the collectors standing proudly next to their amazing find. And then you can see some of the specimens associated, some of the collection objects associated with this collecting event. Now you can see them listed down there. So you can add depictions to these collecting events, as well as all your typical parsing of things. So besides that, you can also do a few other cool things in TaxonWorks with collecting events. For example, you don't just have to, that's the wrong one, sorry. Go back, this one. Yeah. So what if you don't have a lot of information about the collecting event itself, but you have a bulk sample of dried specimens that you mounted up, and you want to preserve this awesome image of the very high-tech and archival method of containing these specimens since 1962, a old sewing container with some handwritten labels for when they were collected in India back in 1962. You want to preserve that data alongside your specimens as they get mounted and labeled. Well, that's actually pretty easy in TaxonWorks. You actually create a separate class of depiction called a data depiction. So this doesn't depict the collecting event itself, but it does depict the data associated with the collecting event. So you can add those as well. So you can actually include those. And then I don't have to keep this container with that original label associated with the specimen on it or anything like that. I can just include a picture and it doesn't take up space in my collection or in our collection. And then of course you can see all the awesome specimens we've built up or added to this collecting event when they were labeled. What's cool is that you can actually add specimens from a collecting event. So you don't have to always work from the collection object perspective. You can actually work from the collecting event perspective. So if I mount up another specimen from this sample, I can edit this collecting event, and then I can add a specimen here, kind of a stub specimen. I can add a new one, add a new identifier, add a preparation repository, a determination, et cetera, et cetera. And so that way I don't have to go through the whole process of normally adding, like I would do normally in creating everything from the collection object perspective. I can do it from the collecting event. So this is a really powerful task that way. So those are two of the really basic, awesome sort of perspectives we were doing while we were iterating on some of the development in TaxonWorks. These are really useful. Those 4 tasks are some of the ones I use every day when I'm managing specimens in the collection. But what about a lot of those legacy collection objects and photos that we had in our database? So here's an example of a slide tray that were imaged back in the 1990s early 2000s. So I helped develop a really awesome task called the Grid Digitizer. And what this does is it lets you break down images into segments, and each of those segments get created as a collection object. So if you have this scanned tray of 20 or 30 or so slides, you can just drag this grid onto here and label each section as a different collection object and create those individually and add individual data parsing later. But you can get the images and with their labels into the collection as quickly as possible. You can create 20 collection objects in about 20 seconds here. So super fast and powerful. Most recently, there was, we spent a lot of time, especially with Dash and Brian Fisher, working on importing Darwin Core archives, as well as importing custom data and data attributes that are not currently supported by Darwin Core into a database. So let's look at the ones that we've imported into the INHS Insect Collection database. You can see 6 different data sets. You drag a data set onto here, and it'll show up kind of like this. You have to give it a name, and then it'll come up with this table, and then you'll go through and you actually select different ones to import, or you can import them all at once. There's a couple different settings here where you can assign. You have to assign your primary namespace, basically your repository. But then you can actually look through here and see, okay, this is how the data is being read. It's not necessarily how it's going to be imported, but you can see how things might get imported. And then once you actually click import here, like I've already done, you might get some errors. So let's look at the ones that have errored here. This one, catalog number was already in use. So I actually already imported this one. Other errors you might encounter are invalid dates, like you can't have a date that's start date or an end date that's earlier than a start date, or things like that. So it helps you improve your data set as you're importing, which is really awesome. I will say it's always a good idea to import this into a sandbox first, because you can create a massive amount of data very quickly. And depending on the way this is done, it can actually duplicate a few things, but there's a few other settings you can put in here to make sure that doesn't happen. So anyway, This is an amazing task that has let us import thousands and thousands of specimens, and really has seamlessly allowed us to move specimens from ecological vouchers in someone else's lab into the collection and vouchered with data in perpetuity with very minimal effort on my part or on my hourly's part. So fantastic task. Finally, most recently, this was just in June that we, well, I don't know about the final version, but this is a good enough version. The Darwin Core dashboard was developed, and this lets us export what is now those millions of specimens, nearly over 1 million collection objects. It is over 1 million collection objects, to a Darwin Core archive that can get ingested by Gbif. Yeah, exactly, Matt. There is no final in TaxonWorks. It just keeps evolving. So let's look at our current dashboard export right now. This one was generated just yesterday. So this is very current, and I'll show that off in a second. But you can see it's just calculating a few things here. It's showing you how fresh that Darwin Core occurrence index is, how fresh the index is, stuff like that. It's giving you a couple cool things too. For example, you can see all the collectors with global IDs, either Wikidata or ORCID, that are listed here. And I'll show a little bit about the power of that in a second. You can also see the ones without them, lots of different collectors there. But this then lets you just click download, and you can download your complete collection object Darwin Core archive. And I've already done that just to save some time. This is what it would look like. You've got a zip archive here that shows up, and then you can expand that, and you've got your data CSV file, your EML file, and your metadata. Now, right now, there is not a way to set any of the metadata for your EML that would get ingested by Gbif except manually. So you have to go in and manually go in and write your own EML file. There are some Gbif tools that will help you do this. So the one that's exported by TaxonWorks is just a stub. It'll get imported by Gbif, but it won't have any of the information about your collection, things like who the creator is, organization is, and stuff like that. I would really love to see this be a feature in TaxonWorks in the future where you can actually just write down the metadata, and TaxonWorks will automatically encode that in the EML for you. But this is pretty great right now. So what we did is we rezipped that, we hosted it on our website, and we pointed it to Gbif. We had Gbif point to that. And what I can do here is show you what we then did. So Gbif has this amazing tool called the data Validator. If you haven't used this before, it's great once you actually get it to run. Normally, you have a big circle here. You just add your Darwin Core archive, and it'll start validating your data set. I did this yesterday just so I could quickly show you what it looks like. It usually takes about 10 or 15 minutes to run, even for 10 or 15 minutes to run. But what's really cool is that it'll tell you all the things that are wrong, or a bunch of different stats about your data set. For example, here's a bunch of validation, things like there's some objects with coordinates invalid, the country's invalid, things like that. And what's really cool is that once you have that data, and especially once you upload it, you can actually search for these and go back into TaxonWorks and find those. So that's another task in TaxonWorks. I'll just finish up talking about this real quick, and that's managing collection objects in bulk. And this is collection object match. So I'm going to try something here, which may or may not go well, but I am actually going to do some data curating on the fly. So I saw in that data validation that a whole bunch of my objects didn't have a repository. So let's go down here and search by repository is without. There is so this is collection objects without a repository in TaxonWorks. So I'll search for those, and it'll tell me, oh, you have 131 records that don't have a repository. I don't know why that is. Maybe someone forgot to add it, whatever. But I can actually look through and see, okay, no, these all are actually at INHS. So let's send this filter to match collection object. So I just sent all those specimens right here. They're all listed here on the side, and I can select them, select all, go to this repository tag and select INHS as the repository and set that as the repository. So I'm now editing all 120 so of those records. And you can see down at the bottom, repository was successfully set. So if I go back to my filter here and then search, boom, I now have no collection objects without a repository. So really easy bulk editing. And there are a bunch of other things you can do here, add specimens to loans, add bulk preparations, add collecting events, etc. So this is a really powerful tool. And the recent feature of having this filter talk directly to match collection object with this button that showed up before is amazing. I love it. It's going to make my life so much easier. All right, so to finish up here, our new data set has those million occurrences. We've actually had another almost 10,000 since June. Where do we go from here? I would really love to see this management of collection objects get even better. I'd love to see more exported Darwin core fields. It's like explicit association data. I would love to see our images in Gbif right now. We're just exporting links to the API. You can't actually see our images in Gbif yet. We're working on figuring that out. I would love to integrate validation of a Darwin core export into TaxonWorks itself. I'd love to see these things come up, or at least some of them come up in TaxonWorks when you export. I'd love to remove the hosting step as well. So instead of us having to upload that to a website, just have TaxonWorks host that with an explicit versioning of each data set version. And lastly, I'd love to see us start leveraging the power of verbatim data and stepwise editors in TaxonWorks. We have these amazing features where you can add verbatim data and then later parse it into stepwise using stepwise editors like the stepwise determinations task, where we're taking this verbatim data on specimens and adding explicit determinations that are parsed out into the taxon name, the collector, and the year all at once. I can do 40 of them at once or 56 of them at once instead of just one. And like Brian mentioned yesterday, I would love to see downloads everywhere, not just in a specific task. But and just to last finish up, I know I'm going over time, but I just want to show you some other fun things. So right now, if you edit yourself in TaxonWorks, so right here, I've edited myself to have both a Wikidata identifier that I've created a Wikidata page for myself, and also I've given myself my ORCID identifier. And you can do that through adding identifiers to yourself here. You can see your ORCIDs, Wikidata, etc. You can see some things pop up. I've given myself some alternative values, even some depictions of me collecting things. But what's cool about that is that when these go to Gbif, because they explicitly have this identifier, we are now using the recorded by ID field, which is not in the Darwin core corpus yet, but Gbif is already using it. And because of that, tools like Bionomia can automatically grab that from your data set. So if I look at my page on Bionomia, and if you have not used Bionomia, it's an amazing tool that lets you look at and attribute specimens to people all around the world. And so if I go to my profile here, even just my public profile, I can see, oh, I collected 76 specimens in New Zealand. I have never gone through the typical method on here where you actually have to select each of these and add them to your profile. All of these were automatically ingested to my profile by the last Bionomia import because we have explicit recorded by ID identifiers on our data when it gets exported. And so Bionomia automatically knows, oh, this is this Thomas McElrath, and we can add these to his profile and show everyone that he collected specimens in New Zealand, which is just the power of integrated data from a field trip that I took to New Zealand, all the way to Bionomia. So with that, I know I'm over time. I will stop and ask questions or let stop and hopefully we have time for questions like this little Lennox Mirandus beetle does.
Yeah, Tommy, can you go back to that last screen just real quick?
The Bionomia screen?
Yep, the last screen, if you still have it open.
Yep.
And click on Science Enabled in the top, just a curiosity to see. Aha.
Yep. So yeah, you can see here that my specimens have now been used in at least 7 different works. Some of these are some of these are more recent. So some of those ones that I just talked about may actually be ones I just uploaded. Let's see. No, these ones aren't. These are older ones, but that's okay. The newer ones I've uploaded will eventually get used. But so yeah, that's one of the coolest things here. You can actually see how your specimens are being used in science.
And again, that's
because of all those explicit links.
Right, and that's made possible and is strictly relevant to data coming from Gbif. So that isn't to say Tommy's data wasn't used in other places, but if they've been downloaded from Gbif and in a data set associated with a paper, they can appear here through the magic of identifiers.
Yeah, and it's very nice, Tommy. Yeah, thanks very much, Tommy. Wonderful talk. That's going straight to YouTube. Just a great explanation of the things you can do. And it's really cool to see what we're trying to do is move a lot of these tasks that let you integrate data closer to the source of the data, right? Like allowing you to get your IDs on there, etc. Makes things that are done in Bionomia somewhat redundant, and it lets Bionomia shine by showing things that, like we just saw, the science enabled that aren't reported everywhere else. So getting identifiers close to the data is pretty cool in TaxonWorks. Okay, we had a couple questions. We are a little over time, but Rich Keller asks, when you geolocate a collecting event, can you locate the event with a defined geographic region or collecting site rather than a specific GPS point or coordinate? So Tommy, he's
absolutely. So here, let me. Can you see? You can still see my screen, right? Yeah, you can. So for example, here's this one in India, and I don't have this to a specific point. I have it as a uncertainty circle around Kharagpur. You can also do. You can create custom polygons for an area, or just add-ons. You can do geographic regions or like custom polygons, whatever you want. You can draw that way. And if it's a really bad locality, like if it was just for example, like India or Illinois or something like that, you wouldn't even use this. All you do is you just assign a geographic area, and then that's all you need to do. You don't even need, this is a separate gazetteer within TaxonWorks that lets you assign pre-populated areas. So for example, come in here with Illinois, you can see there's a couple different ones here and they have shape files. So if you don't know what the georeference is and it's just something really broad, you can just use the ones that are already in here.
Okay, other questions before we jump? First collapse objects that become reused. So Rich, the gazetteer is shared across all projects. It goes down to second level geopolitical subdivisions. And that we've added a feature recently to add alternate values, but that gazetteer is only updated through basically through administrative tasks. I'm gonna mute there. So maybe what you are asking is there a concept of a locality table? And in TaxonWorks, there isn't, if that's what you're asking. We try to emphasize the necessity to move away from text strings as representing localities and towards a geospatial representation. So let's quickly look at a couple other, let's do one more question and then we're gonna need to pivot to our other topics. Jennifer notes that there's some in the documents.
There are some, and we can answer them as we go along as well. So people can jump in, Tommy and others, and answer those while we move forward as well.
So Jennifer just asked, I'll just quickly say, are these workflows that you demonstrated already included in the documentation? Tommy, if I can answer for you, some of them, Jennifer, are listed in the standard operating procedures that Tommy has, so linking outside the documentation, but others need to be basically merged into the core documentation, docs.taxonworks.org, and we can expand on that. So
yeah, so for example,
the
most of the stuff about editing and collecting events and collection objects, that's all decently well documented in our SOPs. But yeah, they're not super well integrated into docs.taxonworks.org yet. But the exporting to Gbif one is one that's really new. I'm still working out like all of there's lots of little things you need to know about when you're importing or exporting. Those we need a lot more documentation about. I've come up with some stuff, but it's not fully fleshed out yet. So yeah, not everything. I noticed Jennifer also had another question. Can labels be printed directly from information on collecting events? Yes, they can. So if I create a label here, and you can see here, I've just created a label and I'll save that. I copied this label directly from this guy right here. I can now go to preview and print labels. I think there's some improvements to be made here still, but I currently use this I manage all my collecting events, and then I create a big custom list of all of them, and then I fiddle with it in a text editor. But so for example, here's all of these. I want to select all of them, and you can see here's all of my labels. And what I would normally do is just go through, select these, and fiddle with them a little bit more. You can fiddle with them in TaxonWorks, but I still think this needs some work. There's some, yeah, anyway. Yeah, I usually fiddle with it in a text editor just because it gives me a little more power, but you can actually print them directly from TaxonWorks as well. And it's not just collecting event labels. You can also create QR codes and barcodes. I'm trying to remember exactly how you do that. I don't usually do that, but you can do that as well. So